In 1776, a group of British colonists declared independence from Great Britain. These men, farmers and lawyers, set out to create a new nation. They dreamed of a nation that gave citizens the right to choose their leaders. A nation in which the leaders represented the citizens. A representational government like they envisioned had existed 2,000 years earlier in an ancient city far away.
In designing the Constitution of these United States of America, we have at various times sought precedent in the history of that ancient republic and endeavored to draw lessons both from its leading ideas and from the tumult and factions which finally brought it low. Thomas Jefferson.
One of the greatest stories from history is how a small farming village on a peninsula in the Mediterranean Sea organized and became an example for a new type of government. Early Romans lived off the fruits, vegetables, and grains that thrived in the fertile soil along the Tiber River. In these early years, the Romans were ruled by a people called Etruscans. Etruscans were skilled artisans, and under their rule, Rome grew from a primitive town of mud and thatch huts to a thriving city of brick. And people flocked there. The man who ruled during this transformation was an Etruscan king named Servius Tullius. There are no statues of him. We have no idea what he looked like. He never became as famous as later rulers of Rome. But his mark on history may be even greater. And all Servius Tullius did was carry out Rome's first census. The census laid out every Roman's obligations to the city: to obey its laws, pay taxes, and do military service. It also gave them rights. If you stood up to be counted and you fulfilled your obligations, you were given a say in how the city was run. Servius, like all rulers since the founding of Rome, had a group of advisors. They were called the Senate. Not all Etruscan kings were as fair as Servius. During the rule of one particularly unfair king, the Romans rebelled. They drove the Etruscans from the city and vowed that they would never again live under the rule of a king. They declared that Rome would be ruled by laws and elected officials. This new form of government needed a name. They called it a res publica, a public thing, a republic. SPQR was the republic's motto. Senatus Populusque Romanus, the Senate and the people of Rome. In the Republic, noblemen and commoners shared power. The nobles served as Rome's leaders, the commoners as her soldiers. In return, everyone had a say in how the government was run. Citizens would assemble to vote on issues and laws. And once a year, the whole city would turn out to vote for two leaders called consuls.
Two, both of them in agreement on everything, elected annually, so that no one person ever had very much power for very long at all.
The election of a consul in the Roman Republic is like the election of the American president. You call people friends who you would not normally call friends. You shake hands, you kiss babies. And what you're trying to do is to get a bandwagon going, to appear a winner.
Like all Roman rulers before them, Roman consuls were advised by the men of the Senate.
Roman senators got no pay. They served for the honor of serving their state as a senator. The Senate was intended to be made up of old men. Not the swiftest of the swift or the strongest of the strong, but the wisest of the wise.
Romans knew that the key to the Republic's success was responsible leadership, and in Lucius Cincinnatus, they found a legendary role model. Cincinnatus was a nobleman by birth, but still he worked his fields with his own hands. One day, a messenger brought news that Rome was being attacked.
And in such an emergency situation as this, the Roman constitution called for the appointment of a dictator.
Once selected, the dictator would have absolute power over all citizens, but only for a maximum of 6 months. Cincinnatus dropped his plow and took up command of the army. He quickly won a great victory and returned to the city in triumph.
Now, he could have stayed on and he could have used his power as he wished. But the very day that he returned to the city, we're told, he immediately resigned the office of dictator, walked back to his farm outside the city, and continued to plow his farm. And the Romans loved to tell that story because here was a man who was totally selfless, who cared nothing for his own livelihood, for his own life, but merely to serve.
George Washington knew that many people compared him with Cincinnatus, and he liked that, and he consciously worked to encourage that image. And so, for instance, during the darkest periods of the war, when some thought maybe he should resign, he held off that resignation because he wanted to do like Cincinnatus did, wait until the enemy was defeated, and then in a big show lay down his power, which he did, and he retired to his own plow at Mount Vernon.
Though there were stories that would inspire leaders thousands of years later, Rome was not a democracy. Women had few rights. Slavery was becoming more and more common, and elections were often rigged in favor of the wealthy. Military leaders took on greater power and often turned their troops against other Romans. From the battlefields emerged a military leader who seized control of all of Rome and changed the course of the Republic forever. His name, Julius Caesar. Stunned by his military strength and his opposition to the Senate, the people of the Republic voluntarily gave Caesar the powers of dictator. With that power, Caesar turned his attention to the poor people of Rome. He gave grain to the poor and land to his soldiers, paid for by himself. Julius Caesar, the dictator, was incredibly popular. But unlike Cincinnatus, Julius Caesar craved the glory of leadership. In 44 BC, Caesar asked the people to make him dictator for life, a glaring insult to the men of the Senate. The senators demanded an explanation. It was March 15th, the Ides of March. They assassinated Julius Caesar in front of the Senate. Romans responded in outrage, and Rome found itself once again in turmoil.
The rule of a single man is the only remedy for a country in turmoil. Tacitus.
As it turned out, that single man was Caesar's grandnephew, Octavian. In 27 BC, Octavian was chosen as the undisputed ruler of the Roman world. Caesar's heir did not hesitate to win the favor of Rome's citizens. He had new aqueducts built. He staged elaborate games, and under his rule, Romans lived in peace. Octavian's public relations campaign worked. The people were happy, and so was the Senate. What they did next brought an end to the Republican era. They allowed Octavian constitutional right to absolute power for life. Octavian took the name Augustus and ascended the throne as Rome's first emperor. With the reign of Augustus came the end of the Republic, but its influence did not die. The lessons of that ancient republic echo to this day in representational governments around the world.